So, here with Shaun Sawyer, Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall, in the absolutely glorious countryside of Devon, just outside Constable. Shaun, I am so grateful to you joining me on this, the first leg of the policing friendship tour, more of which a little bit later on, but thank you so much also for laying on the glorious weather.
It's a gorgeous day, and you are especially welcome to Devon and Cornwall. Obviously we start in Devon today, as you say, a gorgeous green and blue sky. It couldn't really be any more perfect for you, so a good start.
An excellent start, and we're heading down this country lane, which I suspect has seen some traffic, Land Rovers or maybe the occasional tractor, but certainly much more suited for walkers. In my case, heading on into the glories of Exmoor over the coming days. But sadly, Shaun, only an hour and a half of your company, but part of the reason that I wanted to start this my policing friendship tour here in Devon and Cornwall was that Devon and Cornwall were the overall winners of the inaugural World Class Policing Awards back in 2019. Not been able to hold them since because of the pandemic, but Operation Encompass, very worthy inaugural award winner. Can you say something about it, Operation Encompass, for those not familiar with it?
It is very much the brainchild of a head teacher and a police officer, husband and wife, and Elizabeth and David Carney Howarth. Elizabeth, primary school as we'd probably, or starting school, the most vulnerable children. All children are vulnerable, but at various ages they're particularly vulnerable. And David as a sergeant working in Plymouth, and they got together the very fact that we in the police service had information often during the hours of the night or during the weekends. So on a Monday morning would lead to a child turning up at school, very quiet, very subdued. That information has not gone across to the school, and it's really grown and snowballed through their leadership, and is in all but one police force now in England and Wales. An amazing achievement. Over 800,000 referrals in their time from police around when they attend domestic abuse with children present, and the work has gone on. They've now got a phone line for teachers during COVID, where teachers can phone and get specialist psychiatric or clinical assistance on the day, provided by government. And it really has snowballed, and it's that term policing, Bernard, because that's policing, not police. And I think your term, well, policing friendship tour, because policing is nothing without the rest of society keeping us all safe and secure.
The wider policing community, together with the core police community, wonderfully illustrated there with the Operation Encompass story. Teacher and police officer, husband and wife, started this as an idea a few years back, but it went through some challenges, I believe. It wasn't a plain sailing from that very moment. It had some challenges of engagement in getting to where it is now, sort of pretty much widespread. And certainly I know that there was much interest internationally in the approach, which hopefully was supported with the profile that came from the World Class Policing Awards.
Oh, that profile has been immense for David and Elizabeth, and I spoke to them actually yesterday, and they send their very best wishes to you.
And back to them.
And wishing you well for the journey. They'll be watching it for sure. And you're right, even in Devon and Cornwall, because when you get these things, your heart wants it, and then it's part of maybe where we are as society and policing. Then we'll start putting all the obstacles in the way as to why we can't. And of course, sometimes there are very good reasons why we can't share information. But the fundamental of, can we really not share information about a child exposed to one of their parents physically harming, perhaps strangling another one, without going through all the safeguarding stages? That child goes to school the next day. That child then either repeats that, is fearful of other children, or is just quiet and its education is stifled. Exposure to domestic violence in early years. So much work now, the domestic abuse bill, and starting to look at the rights of the child exposed to domestic violence. You know, the victim isn't just the adult, the victim is the child.
And the simplicity at the heart of the programme, of the idea of the teacher, as we step over a little
Bit of a brook there.
brook coming over the road, as the teacher spots something different in the behaviour of the youngster, and prior to that, the police, aware of the incident of domestic violence that they've attended, they forewarned the school.
Yes.
And that means that the care for that child, the teachers are prepared for what may or may not be unusual behaviour, and they've put appropriate provision for safeguarding, or rather for that child's care, in place prior to the start of the school day. So it's the awareness that the child may present with some experiences of that domestic violence, if you like.
Absolutely, and it is child focused, and then inevitably on very rare occasions the parents or the couple will turn up at the school gate, and things can be spotted at the school gate. Remember, this is the nucleus of the role of policing, is to safeguard. We can't be there all the time, and that child will grow up and have many interactions with schooling, particularly in Devon and Cornwall and other parts where you're going to walk, where there'll be members of clubs and societies. The more people that know discreetly, compassionately, the more that child has a better chance of flourishing, and that later life mental illness, depression, even violence, anything we can do to manage that together, policing together, the better chance that child has.
Well, our breathing now is a little laboured, because if I just focus on the path ahead, we're walking up what has turned into, I suspect, experience of much yet to come across Exmoor. A relatively steep incline and smaller steps to get up it. Let me just say a couple of words now, perhaps about the policing friendship tour, which this is literally my first mile or two heading out of the first departure point, Barnstaple. We have all been touched, affected in some way by the pandemic, the last broadly 12 months here in the United Kingdom, coming out hopefully now of lockdown. My experience last year, not directly of COVID, but my wife died last year, not of COVID, but circumstances not helped by COVID, very shortly after both my mum and dad have died. And that was one of those moments, more than moments, where you set to thinking about, almost sounds a bit Life of Brian, but the meaning of life, or Monty Python I should say. And in some dark evenings and weekends, the idea for what became this policing friendship tour was born, aiming to largely on foot, not exclusively, but to travel through the British Isles, visiting in some way every police force, other policing establishments, so academia, suppliers, others, victims, those supporting victims, and similar such organisations on what sometimes will be a journey through some wild places. Does Exmoor count as wild? You probably wouldn't wish it. Certainly not in Devon and Cornwall ground. But also into towns and cities as well. And so that's a little bit about my, frankly, worst year of my life, bluntly, experience of the pandemic. But as we're walking forward now, slightly more downhill, which is a relief, you know, have to move forward, can't go back, and this is part of my moving forward. But what about your experiences here, Shaun, of the pandemic? I hope you know, all have been affected in some way, but personal experiences and professional. What's notable about the last year for you?
I think on the personal, this is the first walk I've had with someone who isn't my immediate family.
Really?
Since just after
Goodness gracious.
March. And here we are, and just, you can't do the smell bit. We're walking through wild garlic, we can see primulas, we've got the oilseed rape, you can hear the birds. I can just see one car, and look at this beautiful, we're on the edges here of Exmoor. And my experience is, I haven't experienced this. I've been in the sea, had the privilege. I think the key bit is I think the public in general, even those who've lived here, have woken up to how precious being out of our cities, and even the green spaces in our cities, are for mental health, for physical well-being, the idea of sunlight. And I think COVID brought home in a very, very big way. You saw when people were disappearing onto Exmoor and into Cumbria, people who perhaps wouldn't normally go there, just get me out of this enclosed space. And the reconnection with nature, even for the Cornish and Devonians and Solonians, let's not forget the islands, has been incredible. And I hope, not in a woke way, but in that recognition of how important our environment is to us as mammals is, and how important it is to our mental health, how it is to our physical health, and those things that you've endured. And you know, not here, but speaking about your daughter and your granddaughter, this reconnection. I love the way you called it a friendship tour, because in the main there is some gnarliness as we unlock, but I think in these villages, people have got friendlier. You've taken the right interest in the well-being of your neighbour, of your scout group, of your people, in a way that perhaps we haven't seen, in my experience, for the last 20 or so years.
And so a wonderful opportunity there for society. Some grim times, hopefully largely now behind us, though we're not quite there yet. But there can be positives coming out of that, not to diminish the negatives, but an opportunity also to focus on the positives. And what then about professionally? There have been some really challenging times, not just for police and policing, but society, but specifically on police. You as Chief Constable here of Devon and Cornwall, you know, colleagues of yours in other forces, you've all had, to a greater or lesser extent, had policing challenges associated with the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure, and part of it has been your own workforce. You know, the colleagues who we had to certainly shield. We had up to one point nearly 1,000 colleagues because of their health issues or the health issues of their family, because remember, all of these people have their own families. Then the homeschooling as an organisation of more than 5,000 people. All those people have home lives.
You lead. This is a narrow part, so.
So to come to work and focus on the public, your home life needs to be as light as it can be. And I always say that our long service and commendations for people with 20 or more, we do it for officers and staff, is my thanks actually go to the families that have supported them and allowed them to do the job that they did.
Yes.
And so that bit was the first challenge in itself, our own working practice, having to do the buildings. Everyone forget we too had to have the one-way systems in the buildings. And those early days, like everyone, the challenge of PPE, and I think most, if not all forces, took a view, how do you balance the needs of your staff, and knowing that care workers and NHS workers were themselves struggling. So, you know, those days are quickly forgotten, but they were extraordinarily challenging. Before you got anywhere near the police the streets and police communities challenge. In terms of that, the first wave in particular, the public were superb, and particularly, I would say, the local radio here. You walk through other forces, but in these communities, Cornwall and Devon, the local radio, whether it's the private stations, but certainly the BBC, the public health messages, the community messages, the food banks, it came together almost naturally, in terms of everyone woke up, this is pretty serious. And then equally, we had the challenges that, young people out of school, come the summer, it got a bit tense as we had the big unlock, and we had some disorder on the beaches. And I do worry as we start this tour of what the summer will be like here. No travel, we're going to have our busiest summer probably ever, and what that might mean. But we will get through it. And in terms of my officers and staff, I always point out, particularly to some of the urban forces, we're a big force as it goes, with nearly 5,000 people, 3,500 police officers. That's 24/7 in just over 4,000 square miles. And so if you're a cop on your own, or a PCSO on your own, or a special constable, you rely on the community in places like this. And so that whole point of view, police by consent, COVID has tested when you start issuing tickets. That proportionality test,
Yes.
has been really challenging, particularly with the surfing community, the kite surfing community, the walkers, the ramblers. We don't want to be that big brother, but at one point there was a tension between people. I've had enough of this pandemic. Well, haven't we all? Hold station. It gets quite tense.
We've just hit. So your answer there had focused on community, and this is slightly tangential. But at this stage, I've landed you in the mud and me on the firmer stretch of the footpath here. But community is absolutely critical, isn't it? Here, and again, come back to: is it police or policing? Police are next to nothing without the support of the wider community, and it's great to hear that the people of Devon, of Cornwall, and of the Scilly Isles have pulled together very largely with police and policing to, in that particular part of pandemic response, pull through. But let's move to one of your wider responsibilities. I was not expecting, when preparing with colleagues' help for this walk and conversation, I either had forgotten or never knew that Devon and Cornwall has the National Centre for Response to Human Trafficking, and indeed you lead on that, and that's certainly over the last handful of years, with the crossing of the Channel, and tying in with Brexit to some degree as well. That's appears to be becoming even more of an issue than it has been in years gone by. Is that a fair assessment? And how do you see things for the response on human trafficking looking forward?
It is a very fair assessment, and I think the reality is all chief officers or chief constables will have big portfolios. I have a few. I have the National Volunteer Police Cadets, and that's my my interest in children, links to Encompass. Migrant children now ratchet up to more levels as to how vulnerable they are. They don't have a choice, and we've had some unfortunate stereotyping. Unfortunate because people are frightened or don't understand that migrant children are somehow a problem. They're not. They really are not the problem. They are very much the symptom of many causes, and I think the UK eventually, as a people, and certainly as a government, got its head around these children being brought here under duress, the terror of escaping a war zone. We can rights or wrongs of a refugee camp that is in itself having rape and serious violence within it, and women flee. They are so vulnerable, and men too, to the traffickers and the traffic. So it comes in many forms. Those fleeing war zones, those who are coerced, and those who are seeking a better life. And that's where that grey area of so-called economic, being smuggled and being trafficked. Smuggled, you are knowledgeable and partaking in trafficked, you're not at its most simplest. Those are such phenomenally grey areas, and the police response to that first response to safeguard, get fluid in them, get them hydrated, get someone who can speak their language. We can then investigate any crime later. And the humanitarian side of the UK has flourished, often because we've been challenged by third sector groups like Human Trafficking Foundation, Stop the Traffic, and others, many others, who've helped us policing and raise our game. It's not about being soft, being compassionate. You can bring the right people to justice further down the line. And you know, we have seen in Essex, one of the places you'll walk, Bernard, the 39 migrants who died in the back of that lorry.
Yes.
That is not unusual, even in the UK, and certainly not Europe. The cockle pickers up in Lancashire, if you recall, many times ago.
Yes.
And even this year, we've had one found dead in the back of a lorry in, I believe it was Nottinghamshire. So this is ongoing. The whys, the push and pull factors, does Brexit make that better or worse? Well, in one way, it makes it clearer as to exchange of information. The government's managed to keep that communication exchange for law enforcement. The government's certainly committed its role on the global stage around the United Nations. Its commitment to eradicate slavery has remained since Theresa May and through to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. And the funding of our team, which is a Home Office fund, so again, you know, we can talk about governments, but they put their purse where their heart is on this issue, is remaining front and centre. And then, of course, lastly, let's not forget our own people can be trafficked. You know, elements of that law, and we look at Rotherham, and child sex abuse is about moving girls across boundaries, long distances, for the purpose of exploitation, falls within the remit of that trafficking of people for exploitation. And so our own indigenous people, women mainly, but certainly the labour part, men, people with disability, mental disability, learning difficulties in labour exploitation, it is in plain sight if we care to look in the UK.
And do you, what are your hopes and fears for the future then? It seems the Brexit outcome is settled, and notwithstanding your views on good or bad, or the population's views on good or bad, and indeed the bedding in of that new position. But you know, these challenges, of course, not just national or affecting Britain, but also international. You know, the likes of Interpol, Europol, the international and regional organisations will play a part. I'm imagining that you and your team interface quite regularly with them, and you know, both opportunities there and risks, you know, challenges associated. Where do you see that developing over the next few years?
So the Crown Prosecution Service in this adjustment are key around our international forms of warranting, the Interpol, Europol, the criminal justice, Eurojust. Those things are more important than ever, because we don't want the petty ill feelings of politics to get in the way of bringing offenders to justice and preventing another trafficked person or migrant death. And in the main, overwhelmingly, that's going as well as it could be. But it will be a challenge, and we're seeing it around the world. Remember, you see, if you go down towards Australia, there, the trafficking of people, the links to Vietnam, to Bali, to others. This is a global crime, second only to the drugs element of global criminality. And that's why, just a quick tip for you, that World-Class Policing Awards, all those agencies you mentioned have best practice. We will learn from the Czechs, we'll learn from the Romanians, we'll learn from the Aussies, the Kiwis. You have to look outside in this world of policing. It's no surprise our Force Vision is world-class sustainable policing for Devon and Cornwall. It's based on some of the insight you've given. The way that British policing remains respected around the world, it can't be stuck in aspic. It has to learn from these other international policing bodies. And because it's policing, how do they work? Just going over a tree here.
Yes,
rather interesting.
just negotiate that. We've done well so far, negotiating all sorts of. Anyway, sorry, you carry on.
No. That idea of, right back to our early conversation. I am really focused on this community here of Barnstable, walking out towards Brighton, Fleming. That really matters. But it's as you draw out that eye and you start to look at the globe, in the main serious and organised crime, not a big issue here. But we've had trafficked people in Devon and Cornwall. We've had migrant workers come in or migrants trafficked into Newlyn Harbour down in Cornwall. We certainly have cocaine and heroin issues in Devon and Cornwall. This is not a rural idyll that's inured from or immune from organised crime. You have to look outside in policing, and perhaps in the last decade we haven't enough, in my view. A bit controversial. I feel policing in austerity got very, very insular, and understandably got a little bit too sorry for itself. And there were lots of other people suffering at that time, have suffered in COVID, and our job is to find the best in the world, to remain the best in the world.
Yeah, I never having been a police officer, but having worked in policing now for 32 I think years, I couldn't support that more. This desire, this need for the international, learning from the very best experiences worldwide. You know, cliche that the world is getting smaller, but it is, and there's an opportunity to learn from good and potentially less good policing practice wherever it may be in the world, and also to share that with others. But let's come back to the very local, because part of my hope for the policing friendship tour over the coming months and potentially years is that it encourages not just a sort of a self-examination of, you know, one's own personal mental health and well-being, but also encourages some giving, some donations to suitable policing charities, whether in the UK or internationally, wherever they may be. Here we are, presumably still in Devon and Cornwall. I don't think we've quite yet got to the
quite made it yet.
to the Avon and Somerset border. There's a little bit further to go yet. So we're still in Devon and Cornwall. And I did ask you just yesterday, whether you would be able to nominate a charity to become the first charity that we encourage people to support in connection with this policing friendship tour. Would you like to just say a few words about the charity that you've chosen?
Well, it started as the Devon and Cornwall Compassionate Fund, but before you finish this tour and long before, it's going to be the Southwest Compassionate Fund. And the reason why that broadening is we are part of the Southwest, part of that broader policing family, not just Devon and Cornwall. And it's transitioning from being police only to police staff colleagues as well. And we've seen in that wider family, your forensics officers, your PCSOs, your call handlers, they're all exposed, and many more of course, I hasten to add to my colleagues, all exposed to those tensions that happen with frontline operational policing and the burdens that brings. It's there for those who've, like yourself, suffered bereavement and just need some help. It can be there as a financial cushion, it can be there as an emotional cushion, providing some days out. The team have managed to get a small lodge in Devon, which is for free, so it's the right case for the weekends to just get away and do what we're doing, listen to the life around you, and remember how precious your own life is and the life of your family and loved ones. And it can make a financial contribution, it can help, particularly where the children have lost a parent, thankfully very rarely through frontline policing, usually through cancer or an illness, to see those children through some very difficult years, and sometimes even help with education. And then for officers and staff who've suffered with mental ill health, sometimes physical ill health, we've had officers who have driven over by cars and the recovery from that. Of course the NHS does a remarkable job, we have our own occupational health services, but it's no surprise that the current chair of that is a guy called Nigel Rabbit, a long-serving police officer, ex-military man, was previously chair of our police federation, who really has made it, with Sarah, the secretary, have made this almost their life's work, because they've lived through it, they've seen it, they've felt it, and they know how important it is.
And so the name of that charity again?
Well, it's the Southwest Compassionate Fund it'll be, but right now, It'll be the Devon and Cornwall Police
So
Compassionate Fund.
the Devon and Cornwall Police Compassionate Fund, the South West Police Compassionate Fund, the first charity that we're hoping that the policing friendship tour will be able to encourage some donations to, and we'll make sure that the relevant details are made available on Policing Insight and elsewhere. Shaun, it's been a fascinating chat. Thank you for the past few minutes. I've quite lost track of what the time of that might be, but it's been fascinating. We've managed to negotiate.
Come on, you get in the middle of this. You're walking the real car track here,
Well,
aren't you?
again, we'll have a chance in a moment to reflect on the beautiful sounds and sights around us, rather than focusing on both speaking hopefully fairly lucidly, at least on my part, and also keeping our footing to the countryside that is around us. We're shortly to dip down to a river valley. We'll cross over that, we'll head a little further. At some point I will lose my companion for the morning, who will turn around and head back into Constable. Shaun, thank you so much for your company. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for making this very first recording on the Policing Friendship Tour so fascinating. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, and thank you for a glorious day
Yes.
out. I wish you well for the rest.
Thank you so much.